Hello everyone, Voodoo here, and today we are continuing our 10.1 tier list coverage with the healer tier list. Now this video will be, of course, both Raid and Mythic Plus. And again, we're going to do the standard thing I say before every tier list. If you're watching this, always pick the player over the class. A better player on a quote-unquote worse class will 9.5 times out of 10 perform better than a quote-unquote worse player on a quote-unquote worse class. So with that out of the way, player over class. Also, like content, comment down below if I'm wrong, if I'm right, whatever. Hit the sub button too, really helps me out. And with all that out of the way, we'll get started. We're gonna start with Raid, I think, today, and then we will do Mythic Plus after. So for Raid, we're gonna start off with Preservation Evoker, and I honestly think Preservation Evoker is going to be really strong still. They did receive some nerfs, but altogether is still one of the best healers in the game. Their tier set is looking to be incredibly powerful. It gives them a Spirit Bloom Hot effect and a Dream Breath increase healing whenever they for the 2 set. And their 4th set is every 4th empowered spell you just gain Essence Burst twice, allowing for more A, Echo Ramps, or B, random Emerald Blossoms around that help you heal up more. They can do really big ramp healing roughly every 20 seconds. And then one of the things that I think is really key here and really, really important, that they actually gained a large buff from the 25% HP increase. And you're probably wondering, Voodoo, how is that possible? I thought that was meant to kind of curb healers' damage and healing, and you'd be right. However, lots of things that P-Voker has, namely Golden Hour, Rewind, and then the thing where they kind of ramp damage off their HP, it's like Emerald Commuter or something. All of that scales off of max HP, right? And scales off the amount of damage you take. So with those things having more HP, people taking more damage, that will lead to a net HPS increase for P-Voker. So your Golden Hour is going to heal a lot more. Your Rewind, which is arguably one of the best healer cooldowns in the game, will heal a lot more. So all told, all together, you're getting a pretty big buff there. Their damage will be lower than the previous tier because there's no more instant cast Living Flames from their tier set. But their tier set brings so much HPS. I really do think they're going to end up pumping this tier. I think will be one of the better options for healers in terms of Raid in the coming season. So next up is going to be Restoration Shaman, and I think they also belong up in the S tier. I think Resto Shaman is going to be very, very strong in the upcoming tier. Their tier set allows for a very, very strong HPS increase in Raid, giving them tons of tie-ins to both Riptide and Healing Rain, things they want to do already. They have that new talent, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it increases the range that Chain Heal can heal at, which solves one of their biggest issues, which is spread healing. On top of that, they also have passive damage now if you can find the point to flex into Acidic Rain, which can do actually some pretty good DPS on the boss just by throwing Healing Rain down, which is something you already want to do. On top of that, Shamans do bring really good just general cooldowns. They have Ancestral Protection Totem, if that's useful. They have Spirit Link Totem. They have things just like Healing Tide Totem, stuff like that. They bring Mana Tide Totem for your healers as well. They just do really good HPS, have a good source of passive damage, have a strong toolkit, have a strong tier set, have really good defensives with Astral Shift and Reincarnation if that's required, and are all around just very, very, very solid and just a really strong spec in general. Moving on to Discipline Priest next. I'm going to put Discipline Priest up in the A tier. The Discipline Priest is one of those healers where, as you know the fight, as you know where things are going to happen, when damaging things happen, when you can start moving, when burst is going to happen to ramp for, if there's movement happening, that is going to perform very, very well at, and it's going to be less good with more uncoordinated groups. But in like a mythic environment for a raid, you're going to be able to coordinate a Disc Priest very well. And in those environments, this place will absolutely blast. They have really strong CDs whenever they are ramping, so they have really, really big healing during the ramps. Less so outside of it, but it's a little bit better now with their power word shield change. And in a raid like Avarice the Shadow Crucible, there's lots of predictable damage events with not much movement happening, which poses to be a very good environment for Disc Priest to succeed in. One of the issues with Vault is that there's lots of movement with a little bit of unpredictable damage or damage during movement. So Disc Priests weren't able to get their full ramps off. But in Avarice the Shadow Crucible, they're going to be able to do that. Their tier set is pretty strong as well, giving them some more ramp. On top of that, they also have Barrier. Barrier is a crazy good damage reduction cooldown. And in a world where enemies are doing more damage and we have more health, damage reductions are going to gain a lot of value over HPS cooldowns, more so than they did before. This priest also brings pretty good passive damage. Their buttons are a bit bloated, but they still bring good damage, and they also bring PI and Priest buff. So I think altogether, Disc Place will be very, very strong, and you're going to see them pretty often in Aberrus of Shadow Crucible. Next up is Resto Druid. I think Resto Druid is going to be a very strong competitive spec in Aberrus the Shadow Crucible. Back in the previous season, they did a ton of HPS, and that isn't really changing. Their tier set's going to give them even stronger Flourish windows with Flourish. You're kind of getting like a mini Flourish after that, kind of giving to their big damage healing potential. They can do a lot of damage as well passively with Nature's Vigil whenever they're able to turn that healing into damage, which is a nice pickup. Resto Druid also brings some of the things that you need from a Druid, B-Res and Mark of the Wild, although there are 3 other Druid specs, so oftentimes the value of this is a little bit less. However, I do think that Restoration Druid is definitely one of the stronger healers. The amount of HPS they can pump out with their Flourish, Convoke windows, the amount of stuff they can do with healing, with their dots, like Life Bloom, Germination, all their other hots and stuff can really output against like damage over time events or rot if those damage types are ever going to show up. And there's a few of them in Aberrus for sure. So overall, with the damage component from Nature's Vigil, the dots they have, they can go into cat form or boomy form to DPS during downtime. They have very good just burst profiles of healing with with Flourish and with Convoke and stuff like that. Trank if you need it. Those are all very powerful CDs. So we do think they're going to be an A tier. They're not as strong in the output as the S tier specs, but I still think they're going to be very, very strong. So next up is Mistweaver Monk, and I'm not going to lie, I am personally very high on Mistweaver Monk, but the recent nerfs to its tier set, which is very strong, by the way, you get like mana and then like a buff to Revivifies, it has me a little bit concerned. So originally I would put them in A tier. But with the nerf to their tier set as well as the buffs to Windwalker, I think I might drop them down to B. Now, it's really close. I could see it going either way here. I do think Mistweaver is in a great spot. But the HP increase changes actually do hit them pretty hard. Because they essentially are no longer using a playstyle people are used to. You're basically never pushing Essence Font anymore, which is pretty interesting. So they revolve around a new kind of playstyle where they ramp up their Renewing Mists and kind of cleave off that during one of their Celestial cooldowns. But in those Celestial cooldown windows, they have a crazy amount of HPS. It's really, really high. If they do a ton of healing, it's kind of crazy. Now, the issue with that is they do absolutely burn through mana. Of course, their tier set helps with this, but the 6-second internal cooldown does effectively reduce how much they can have up of that mana regeneration and of their bonus. So I do think that nerf with no compensating buffs is very unfortunate and does kind of drop them down into B tier, in my opinion. On top of that, I was going to say that Mistweaver would have been the absolute best way to bring your Monk buff in the next tier. But I think with their nerfs and with Windwalker's buffs, you might end up seeing a Windwalker in the raid. There's enough 2-target adds and random other adds on the final few bosses where I do think Windwalker can be valuable. But, we're not going to go into that too much here. But overall, I do think Mistweaver is very strong. They do bring all the buffs you need them to. They're very defensive, very mobile. They bring passive damage. They are a melee healer, and it's a very melee-unfriendly tier, which definitely brings them down a bit. But I think without those nerfs, they could have been incredibly powerful. But the slight nerfs do, I think, in my opinion, drop them down. But I'm hoping I'm wrong with this one. I'm a big Mistweaver copium person, really hoping they do a little bit better. But we shall see once the raid releases. Moving on to Holy Priest here, I'm going to put them up in B tier as well. Holy Priests bring a lot of good things. They bring a pretty decent amount of throughput whenever they're healing, and they do bring fairly solid damage and PI. However, I do think overall they're just going to be a little bit weaker than their other counterparts. They have that weird B-Res cloak talent that used to be legendary. Don't know if anyone uses that or not. But I think the biggest reason why they're in B, at least in my opinion, are the nerfs they just ate. I think before that they were performing very solidly, but I think them getting those nerfs is enough in this kind of balanced metagame to knock them down into B tier. Now again, they're very good, very competitive, very strong, but I do think they just bring a little bit less than the above two slots. Now their tier set is good as well. It just gives a nice passive healing increase to their prayer, which is nice. We'll see what actually talent builds end up being the best as well. As I'm recording this, I don't know if there's a new playstyle discovered or not. I think there was, but not 100% sure. But overall, I do think they're strong, but I don't think they're as strong as the 4 options above them. That's kind of just Holy Priest. Now last, but certainly not least, we have Holy Paladin. Throwing them up in A tier. I think Holy Paladin is just going to be very strong. Paladin is one of those classes where you want 2 of them in every raid because of Devotion Aura and Retribution Aura, and Holy Paladin is one of the most important ones to bring because they have Aura Mastery, able to increase the effectiveness of either Devotion or Retribution to pretty strong levels, honestly, as a 3-minute cooldown. Holy has a very unique healing profile as well, where it's meant to kind of not have that big rampy HPS raid healing, but is really good at healing fewer targets more often. So you're really strong at like 2 to 3, sometimes 5 target healing, and just cleaving that healing onto each other, keeping the tanks up, spot healing the raid, healing up the melee clump, stuff like that. Holy Paladin is absolutely indispensable for. Their new tier set pushes them more towards Holy Prism, which I think is really cool. It's a talent you've kind of never touched before now, beside for like a meme here and there. But now that Holy Prism is taken, you do have a nice passive AoE heal. It only heals 4 things, or like 1 big nuke on 1 person, but it does do passive damage as well. On top of that, the rise of Avenging Wrath, I think it's called, Avenging Crusader, my apologies, also gives you a ton of single target damage. That cooldown feels really good now, giving your Crusader Strike and Judgment just like 30% more cooldown. You do healing as you burst it, and you get kind of just damage increase as well. So that's pretty interesting there. This is the only healer tier set this time around that brings you damage as well as healing. And they are already just one of the highest passive damage dealing healers in the game. So overall, I think they are really strong at their niche healing, which is very viable. You kind of need one because of Devotion Aura, and they just bring really good damage. That slaps them into the A tier and makes them, a pretty viable pick in my opinion. So these are my raid rankings. I want to, just stab this home. Realistically, all the healers are so close to each other that the difference between an S tier and an A tier is so minor it barely even matters, right? I put these here for some stratification so that, there's a quick way to see which ones are probably a little bit more powerful, which ones are probably a little bit less powerful. But in the grand scheme of things, every single one of these healers is very strong. If you're not pushing like top 10 world, maybe a little bit less than that, then you can 100% do everything with these healers. Every single one of them is viable. Every single one of them will get CE and do whatever you want to do in this game. So keep that in mind. Use these tier lists to inform your decisions, not to make your decisions. So with that out of the way, we'll move on to the Mythic Plus rankings now. So now we are moving over into the Mythic Plus side of things. I'm going to reiterate what I said at the start. Again, this is for higher keys, above the 23 plus range all the way up. And same with that, in that same vein, pick the player, not the class. Use the tier list to inform your decision, not make your decision. There's lots of variables that go into players and everything like that. A better player with like a higher IO score and a quote-unquote worse class will most often be better than a worse player on the flavor of the month spec. Now, that being said, still there are going to be some stratifications in these rankings, so let's get into it. So we're going to start with the best one, in my opinion, is going to be Restoration Shaman. I think Restoration Shaman is set up to be really powerful in this upcoming Mythic Plus season. They have very strong healing now, but altogether across the board, I think healing is pretty even. I think realistically, all the healers are pretty close to each other. The kind of stratification between the layers is pretty small, but I do think that Restoration Shaman is just pretty powerful overall. They bring a lot of passive damage now with Acidic Rain, which is really, really powerful. They can bring some active stuff if they take Stormkeeper, and then just with Chain Lightnings in general. They bring really strong healing, like I mentioned. Their tier set is good for throughput, doesn't do any damage, but a lot of the healer tier sets this time around don't have any damage components, but the tier set is pretty strong for throughput. On top of that, their utility is almost unmatched. They bring Lust, although I do think Mage will be pretty strong this season, so I think that's less important. But bringing Lust is very strong. They have the best kick in the game, Wind Shear, although the dungeons are a little bit less kick heavy. But on top of that, they also bring something like Poison Cleanse Totem, which I think is actually just really strong. On PTR, it worked on Afflicted. Unsure if that will go live. But they have really good ways of dealing with the live affixes that are the new ones. They have Hex for Incorporeal. They can kick Incorporeal almost by themselves, which is kind of funny. And then on top of that, they also have just the ability to kind of like hex them, Incorporeal, dispel the Afflicteds. So I think altogether, Resto Shaman just kind of brings the whole package. That's something you want in every key. Tons of healing, tons of DPS, lots of utility. So I think they are very, very powerful going into this next season. Moving on next, we're going to talk about Preservation Evoker, and I think this class is very strong, putting them up in A tier. I don't think they're going to be as dominant as they were in the last season. They received some nerfs, and the strength of Resto Shaman really is just going to outshine them a bit, but they still bring lots of powerful things. Their tier set is going to be very strong for them in terms of healing. Spirit Bloom will just top the whole party, and then the Hot will keep them going for a little while after that as well. They bring really strong damage in terms of Fire Breath just being uncapped AoE, Deep Breath as well. They can disintegrate, they can use Azure Strike, so they have tons of damaging potential. Now they're going to lose a little bit because they're no longer going to have instant cast Living Flames from their tier set, which is unfortunate. I know it was a fan favorite for lots of people, but that is going away. But they're still going to have very valuable healing and damage profiles, doing a lot of it. Not as much as Resto Shaman, of course, but still pretty good. They bring a kick. It's a really long kick, but still a kick nonetheless. They bring Lust, which is very powerful. They bring the movement speed buff, which is like honestly pretty not that you don't really care about it unless you have a Havoc Demon Hunter, which, hey, that's pretty fun. They also bring just strong utility in the forms they have knockbacks, knock-ups, they have an Omni Dispel, they have hard CC they can take for Incorporeal. So altogether, I do think that Preservation Evoker does have kind of a complete package and will be very good in keys going forward. Next, we're going to talk about Holy Priest. I'm going to put Holy down in B tier. Now, I think Holy Priest is going to be pretty strong, and this kind of just shows how powerful all the healers are going to be. But I do think that they are just going to lag behind the higher tier specs in a few different scenarios. Their healing is going to be strong, but I do think that S and A tier healers are going to be output just a little bit more. Likewise, I think their damage is also going to be really good, but again, just fall behind a bit. They don't have that crazy of a dispel package. Like, they don't have the poison and disease. That's the real prio one this time around. But that's okay. They do bring good utility otherwise. Shackle Undead, stuff like that to handle Incorporeal and Afflicted, the new affixes. So they both can do that really, really well. They do bring PI as well, and I do think this will be a comp where PI will end up being very powerful. We'll see if the Holy Priest will end up bringing that. But I think overall, just in general, their healing and their damage just a little bit less than the top two tiers here. Their tier set's going to be pretty strong with Prayer of Mendings. You're going to have them out basically all the time to help with like rot damage. But again, I do think they just fall a step behind the classes above them. Next up is Mistweaver. I'm going to put Mistweaver down in B tier as well. Mistweaver has insanely crazy high AoE damage, which I think is really important. And they also have pretty good Disease Dispel and Poison Dispel, so they have that Dispel package you want. They also bring the ability to paralyze, leg sweep the Incorporeal adds, but I do think their healing overall and their single target damage is going to be just a bit less than other ones. They're also one of those active damage specs where they have to do more actively damage than... they do passively fist weave, but to get the most out of it, you do have to slam some globals into your DPS things instead of like vivifying, for example. I don't think their tier set will have that much impact in M+. It can help you with mana, I guess, but when you have time to drink between pulls, that is less important. I do think overall they are very powerful and very strong still, but the buff they bring is much worse in Mythic Plus because there's only 5 people, and I do think this is going to be a ranged meta for sure. Their AoE damage is very high, but I think the rest of it just kind of leads them to being a step behind the two above them. Also, melee, the dungeons are a little bit unfriendly to melee, just in general. And you already have like a tank and probably like one melee in your comp. So adding another melee in the term of a healer is probably a little bit less than ideal in this current environment. We're going to go Holy Paladin next. I think Holy Paladin belongs up in B tier. I think Holy Paladin will be pretty strong. Their tier set is interesting, given they take Prism now, Prism of Light, which can do some pretty good passive damage while healing. They can, just kind of zap enemies or heal allies, and it's a pretty interesting button to take. They also do really good passive damage. But I do think their utility is going to be a bit munched because of just how prevalent and powerful both Ret and Prot Paladin are going to be, which I do think drops them down a bit. Their overall healing numbers are pretty good for a 5-man, but again, they're just going to be a little bit less than those above them. Their damage is very solid, but again, they do have to be doing that active damage, right? So they do globals that aren't healing. To do that damage. Stuff like Prez, stuff like Resto that we see above them have that nice passive generation with healing, with Fire Breath just being a very strong passive option, or the Healing Rain for Resto being another passive option. I do think Holy Paladin will be very strong. I think all of these healers are strong. You're not going to go wrong with any of them. But I do think they fall a bit behind the S and A tier healers in terms of healing and damage output. And I do think the fact that their utility is munched up by the other two Paladin specs, which both look very, very strong, does diminish them a bit. We are rounding the home stretch here with Discipline Police. I'm going to put Disc up in A tier. I think Disc will be pretty strong. They have very strong damage ramps to be able to kind of basically blanket your whole 5-man party in atonements whenever you need to and heal them off, which I think is going to be really good. They bring really good damage while they heal, so you don't have to sacrifice anything. You are doing that damage and also healing at the exact same time, which I think will be very, very powerful. Barrier is also a really good group external. 30% damage reduction or 20, whatever it is still very, very high these days. It's very good. They bring PI, which I think will be very valuable for the warlocks or mages you might end up bringing in your comp. And overall, I do think they're just a great healer. I think they're a little bit above Holy Priest. You do have the option to flex between the two of them, which I think is very valuable for a priest healer. But I do think Disc just brings a better overall healing and damage profile than Holy does, while still retaining a lot of those strong aspects like Priest buff, PI, Shackle Undead, Power Red Life, all those things to kind of handle and deal with the new affixes being thrown our way. Rounding off the healers here with Restoration Druid. I'm going to slap them up in A tier as well. I think they're very strong. I think they're going to be a great pick moving forward. They have really good utility with the Verse buff, which I think is the most powerful buff that your healers can bring this tier. Just 3% Verse is very, very strong for everybody in the party. It's just going to be very powerful no matter what you get. They have really good damage and healing. They're able to kind of react and just position themselves well to deal with lots of damage types that come at them, while also being fairly mobile, which I think is important. And they also can do good damage. They can throw out all their hots and heal while DPSing in like cat form or something, or boomy weaving, which I think is really powerful. They bring roots, knockbacks, they can bring a stun. They bring a really good dispel profile. Not as good as Monk or Paladin, which I think are the best too, but still good overall. On top of that, they also bring B-Res, which I think is important. We're unsure, again, what the comps will look like, although Paladin tank is probably going to be the best, and they also bring a B-Res, so a little bit of munching there, but it's still nice to have another B-Res option. Resto Druids are also just incredibly tanky, so I think overall they're going to be poised well to in the next Mythic Plus season. Their tier set, again, generally powerful, but nothing too crazy. It doesn't give any damage, just kind of healing. I guess technically it gives healing through like Nature's Vigil, but you know, hey, at the end of the day, it is just a healing throughput tier set. But overall, I do think that Resto Druid is going to be very powerful and poised to do well in the next season. So these are my picks for Mythic Plus. Again, all of these healers are very, very close to each other. The difference between S and B tier is not as big as you think, not that wide of a gap. Realistically, all these healers can do every key level. You'll see Resto Shaman probably the most on the higher end, but the rest of them can really do everything else. You shouldn't just turn down somebody because they're a Mistweaver, for example. Every single healer spec is very powerful. As long as the player behind it is competent, you will do well with these healers, right? So there's nothing really that bad out of all these healers. Everybody is strong. So don't go out there and just start not taking people who I ranked B. Again, use this to inform your decision, not to make your decision. So that is going to be it for today. I will have my DPS tier list out tomorrow, and the day after we'll do Raid and then Mythic Plus. And then next week we will start off with some class guides for next season. I'm very excited for next season, so if you want to stick around and get some more WoW content in your feed, hit the sub button, would really help me out. Also, leave a like on the video, comment down below as well, help spread the video to more people. And I'll catch you guys next time. New tier list tomorrow. See you guys then. Peace.